Number 10. Location, location, location. So first off, let's begin at the very foundation as to why medieval castles were built in the first place. And the biggest hint lies in where they were built. From the 11th century onwards, medieval castles were built for a few reasons. 1. To demonstrate wealth. 2. Provide a place of defense and retreat. And thirdly, to defend important passageways and landways. Oh, and it was a nice place to live. But specifically because of the last few reasons, where a castle was built really mattered. Some were built by the sea to have a strong advantage over naval attacks, or they were built on hilltops just like you see in the movies. The more they could see, the better the chance they had of anticipating the enemy's attack. But even still, some castles took this idea to the extreme, such as Castle Monte Titano, which literally looks like it's about to fall off of a cliff any moment, or Przemyśl Castle, which was built into the side of a cliff face and is only partially visible from the outside. This would definitely make it difficult for anyone to attack the fortress given the rough terrain, but still, like, how did they even build that? How did you even build it? I don't even know. Just the talent, pure talent. Number 9. Helmeted cock. No. I'm not talking about what you think I'm talking about. Think about how much entertainment you consume on a daily basis. You're watching me right now, scrolling on TikTok, Instagram, movies, Netflix, whatever you want to do. The desire for entertainment is strong in humanity, so medieval nobles found ways to insert the funnies into everything they could, even food. Helmeted cock was one such entertaining delicacy that delighted all of the guests behind the castle walls. It was essentially a rooster stitched to a pig and then roasted. Another game they used to play with their food was live frog and chicken. They would put live frogs into pie shells so that when someone cut into it, all these frogs would just ribbit about the dinner table. Hilarity! And then live chicken was significantly darker. They'd pluck a live chicken in boiling water in front of the guests, like in a jacuzzi, and when it passed out, they'd glaze it to look like it was cooked. Then they would lay it on the table, and when the chicken finally came to, it would bound up and down the table to the delight of the guests. This poor chicken who's like frantically being like, where the heck are my feathers? I'm naked! Just awful. Weird times. Weird times. What else were they gonna do? Number 8. The art of dying. To see where I'm going with this, check out this pic. Why does he look so calm? He's literally being stabbed in the head and like the side and everywhere else. While in real life this wouldn't actually happen, you wouldn't be this calm if you were being killed, but this was the goal. People lived in a very pious society back in the medieval ages, and what with death looming around every corner with the Black Plague, you know, they developed a very unique idea about death called ars moriendi, the art of dying. The idea revolved around a good Christian death, that it should be planned and peaceful. I'm going to die on December 16th, blah, 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 whatever date. They didn't actually say that, but anyways. So as medieval people were lying on their deathbed in their castle, they were expected to receive it without despair or any kind of existential crisis. You had to take it honorably, and if you didn't, it was looked down on, but then again, you were also dead, so what does that matter? But it was because of this belief that even in paintings depicting gore and death, the victim, who was stabbed in the head, always had like a calm expression, just like, yeah, this is fine. It's a flesh wound.
Number 7. Dovecoats. You know when you walk down the street and a white colored excrement falls on you from above and you look up to see a pigeon just looking down on you as if it owns your whole existence? Imagine that, times like 2,500 in a circular tower, and you've got a dovecoat. These structures actually showed off status and wealth, as only the lords were legally allowed to have them. Doves and pigeons proved to be an excellent source of food with their meat and eggs. Their feathers were also valuable, and yes, even their droppings found use back in the day. Doves even had religious value, being associated with the Holy Spirit. Pigeons, on the other hand, are a menace to society and need to be stopped at all costs. Thank you for listening to my PSA. Gotcha, you little rascal. You were gonna keep watching this video without slapping that like and subscribe button, weren't you? That's fine. I guess you can do that. But gee, we would really all appreciate it if you just gave those buttons a little poke. And then we can poke back with more of these videos. Deal? Alright, moving on. Number 6, the buttery. I can't believe it's not butter. Won't believe it, sister. This has nothing to do with butter. No, in fact, the name actually comes from beer butts, otherwise known as barrels. The room itself was located pretty close to the main hall, where yeomen would serve beer to the people who were too low in the ladder to be allowed to have wine. And it was usually connected to the beer cellar down below. How is this unholy? Because, I mean, I don't know about you, but I've never done a single holy thing after a few beers. Number 5, bedchambers. Do I need to say more? Actually, yes. See, while the bedchamber was the place where the deed was done, those lucky servants that were allowed to actually stay in this room with their lords and ladies often slept on the floor wrapped in blankets and soaking up the heat of the fireplace. The castle itself usually had a cold dampness about it, which sounds lovely. So there were often tapestries hanging on the walls to counteract this. The servants on the floor thing makes me think of when you had like sleepovers and you had to tiptoe through all your friends sleeping on the ground to leave the room. Number 4. Gatehouses. Now for a place with the least amount of holes. Actually, it probably had the most. The gatehouse was probably the most fortified structure in the castle. The holes we have here were for the sole purpose of hurling or shooting projectiles. Some were for traps and obstacles. The gatehouse was a house for the main weak spot of the castle, the front gate. And as such, it had to be the most defendable part of said castle. It was also usually the most lavish and ornate part of the castle. If you're inviting Lord Reginald from across the way to your castle, you want him walking through that front door thinking, hey, this guy could absolutely defend against me, but also he has impeccable taste.
Number 3. Secret passageways. If I am ever in my life able to actually afford a house, we'll see. One of the ride or die requirements is a secret passageway or to a secret library. Like both. Both would be great, but a secret library is a must. And I will never tell anyone about it because how cool would it be if they found it themselves? Medieval castles were filled with secret passageways and alcoves designed to help facilitate escape should the need arise. In fact, it was kind of a requirement of fortifications to have one. The main secret entrance was called the postern. It was small, therefore easy to defend and protected by metal grates, as well as there were battlements above it. However, the entrance could be exploited if in the wrong hands. Say you have some double crossers behind your walls. They could help sneak in the enemy soldiers, such as the case of Corfe Castle during the siege of 1645. An officer named Colonel Pittman helped aid enemy troops in through the postern, condemning the fate of the fort. Number 2. Where's the loo? There are so many reasons to be thankful for modern day plumbing, but this reason above the rest. Because of plumbing, we don't need a gong farmer. What is a gong farmer? I'm not glad you asked. In castles, bathrooms were often called gongs or loos, and often overhung over the moat or onto the ground so that like whatever was happening would just drop below. There was a wooden board with a hole in it, you sat on it, did your business and got up. Simply straightforward. But sometimes the droppings fell into a cesspit like in Rochester Castle. The smell would rise up, and though they didn't know about germs, they believed bad smells were unhealthy. So eventually the pit had to be cleaned. Enter the gong farmer. This is a dirty job that even Mike Rowe would run from. They had to scoop out the stuff, ferry it away, and bury it. It was a dangerous job too, and one poor fellow named Richard the Raker fell into one and drowned. Now that's a way to go. And last but not least, the Tower of London Zoo? The Tower of London has seen a lot of action since it was built by William the Conqueror in the 1070s. It has housed some of history's most famous political prisoners, but did you know that at one time it was kind of a zoo? From the 1200s to 1835, the tower housed an exotic assortment of wild animals. Lions, tigers, bears, oh my, but also elephants, monkeys, and polar bears. They were brought to the castle as gifts, and if you visit the attraction now, there are wire sculptures commemorating the beasts. In 1235, Henry III was given leopards, though most likely they were lions, but they were just called that, by the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, and that's where it all began. The king decided to start a zoo at the tower, and that he did. A polar bear joined the exhibit in 1252, and then an African elephant in 1255. A special enclosure was built, but sadly the elephant died only a couple years later, which was sadly the fate of most of the animals, except for the lions. They did pretty well.
Number 10. The kitchen. Now that you've got your appetite, let's talk about the kitchen. Major kitchens of the castle usually had to deal with providing at least 2 meals for several hundred people every day. As you can imagine, this is where the work would be put in. By a large staff too, usually in the hundreds. So you're sweaty from working and surrounded by a bunch of other blokes. Sounds pretty awful. But you didn't take into account the amount of heat. The guidelines on how to make enough food for a 2-day banquet include the chief cook having to at least have 1,000 cartloads of good dry firewood and a large barn full of coal to keep the fires going. It's spicy in the kitchen, let me tell you. Number 9. The main hall. The idea of a standing army wasn't exactly a thing during the medieval period, so what you would have is your knights or castle soldiers. And unless there was a barracks, the main hall would often convert to have a bunch of cots in it where these soldiers would sleep. It could also be where your guests might stay, and even your servants if you didn't have a room for either of them. And then it became your dining room. It was also your party room, and your courtroom. It was honestly a pretty versatile room, so much room for activity. You could probably imagine the amount of tomfoolery that happened here though. A large group of sweaty men and women after a feast, and they don't have to walk home because they are staying the night. Nice. Number 8, the pooper. The title says unholy, but this room's main purpose is to have a hole. A hole for people to sit their little keisters down on and drop the kids off. Sometimes down a nice long shaft through the castle that went straight to the cesspit or to the moat. If the moat was a room, I'd probably include it on this list because, yikes. A toilet isn't something you'd actually find in most medieval castles. There are easier places to do your business outside. The garderobe is basically a tiny little closet-sized room with a hole in it for this sole purpose. But they were also used for storage, like when you had visitors. You gotta put their coats and cloaks somewhere. Why not next to where Steve is trying to go potty?
Number 7, H.H. Holmes. While not a castle in the stone and brick sense, this place is certainly big enough to be a castle and has lots of trapdoors like a castle. And there's a really weird guy who's bloodthirsty that owns the building like a castle and a king, so yeah, it checks out. H.H. Holmes was the owner of the often called Red Rum Castle. That's backwards for murder castle. Basically, it was a very large hotel that he fitted to his bloodthirsty needs. Trapdoors, hidden staircases, and areas allowing him to sneak about and take his victims down to the basement where they would await a most painful destruction. While the building is gone now, after Holmes was gone when the building was still there, many of his victims still roamed the halls. He confessed to 27 of those disappearances. Though some suspect it's higher and some suspect he doesn't classify as a serial and a lifer, even though I don't know why, because 27 not a big enough number for you? Doesn't make any sense. Or is that H.H. Holmes saying that himself? Number 6, Dracula's Castle. I don't know, that's what the vampire sounds like. A lot of impressions today. Vlad the Impaler was an awful and evil tyrant from the late 1400s who defended Castle Bran against his enemies and did so quite horrifically. However, it goes beyond that. Never shy to use violence to get his point, his point across. He was a ghoulish figure who was thought to be a vampire himself. They might have been right, he was pretty weird. Yes, he was the basis for Count Dracula. Dracula might be scary, but he's got nothing on this guy. Vlad was known to impale people alive on spikes and logs that were, well, spike-like, and leave them to slowly perish away on full display. It's said that the bloodthirsty vampire can still be found lurking the halls of his old castle. I dare you to come in. Number 5, Casa Loma. For those that don't live in Canada or have never been to Toronto, there's a castle in the middle of the city. Yes, it's a real castle, and yes, I realize how that sounds, but there's a castle in the middle of the city. I don't know. Constructed in 1914 by Sir Henry Pellet for him and his wife. It cost him a fortune. Ooh, I forgot to put the number. I believe it was $1 million. That was a lot of money back then. Anyway, but it seems from the very start it was strange. For one, this architecture was outdated, even back then. Of course it was outdated, it was hundreds of years ago. Its massive size and what happened shortly after. This is not the case of a man who lived here all his life and passed, because he was forced to leave the home just a few short years later due to financial losses. However, today you might be able to find the White Lady ghost, as seen on the second floor and most recently in the basement. Now, the running theory is that she was one of the many servants who perished from influenza during the time, and if there's anything we know, it's that floating lady ghosts wearing white are the spookiest. Am I wrong? No, I'm not. That's science. I know it is. I'm a scientist. They'll put a beaker beside me. That's how you know I'm a scientist. Yep. Number 4, Edinburgh Castle. Oh hey, what time I'll bust this one out again nicer. Oh you lad, Edinburgh, Scotland, and a most beautiful castle. I'll stop doing that. She's been there for hundreds of years, and statistically speaking, is one of the most attacked places on planet Earth, with a total of 26 over a span of a few hundred years. Apparently, that was enough to make it haunted. What's more interesting than that is a young lad who was tasked with seeing where a newly discovered tunnel led to. To make sure he didn't get lost, he took his bagpipes with him and was instructed to play so people above could tell where he was and what progress he was making. At first things were going great. He made his way into the tunnel and the people above could hear him playing. This was followed by a sudden and immediate stop. Ooh, horror. At first folks were too scared to go in after him and see what became of the red-haired lad who played the pipes. When the courage was mustered to see what actually happened, there wasn't a single trace of him. Not even the pipes, sir. Nothing left. That's so sad. Poor pipe playing boy. I was so sad for him.
Number 3, the dungeon. You knew this was gonna be here. Don't pretend to be surprised. Well, guess what? It ain't as common as you might think. And it wasn't always a deep, dank cellar in the bottom of the castle. It actually started off as a prison in the tippy top of the tallest, safest tower. Apparently, keeping people in cells wasn't actually commonplace at first. You'd probably just, But hey, when they did have dungeons, then yeah, they were pretty grim. They were always put in the coldest, darkest, most moist part of the castle. And they were usually just prisons. Number 2, oubliette. Bouncing off the dungeon is a much smaller dungeon and hey, another hole. Yep, this one is kind of worse than a latrine though. You see, this is a hole that they would actually put people in. Imagine being put in a hole in the ground, where it was too small for you to actually sit down, with a trapdoor on top, too high to reach. That's an oubliette. The word oubliette is actually from the French word to forget, which is what they'd do. They'd put you in this hole and then forget about you to die. Lovely, right? Number 1, torture rooms. Here we are. Now how many of you weirdos came here for this one? This room is separate from the dungeons usually, not always, but it was at least not very far. Still gotta keep your prisoners cold and dark as you make them squeal for the end, right? Wow, that was dark. This was the room where you'd keep all your favorite tools of the pain trade. Stretched, hung by your ankles, fire, tools of all kind. There were trap doors in some torture rooms too that would lead to dungeons or pools of water. Some torture rooms, like those during the Inquisition, had even thicker walls to keep the screams in. Some of these torture rooms weren't used as often as you think though, as merely having a torture room was enough to get prisoners to give you what you wanted. Alright, can we move on now please? Okay.
Number 10, Blickling Hall. The birthplace of Anne Boleyn, the second wife of King Henry VIII, and for certain not the last. He had a few after her. Unfortunately for the young lass, she wouldn't last too long, and after failing to give her husband a male heir to the throne, their marriage fell apart. It's a classic story in all medieval marriages, how it goes. And like all marriages that fall apart, there was no saving it. Go ahead, try, I dare you. And when King Henry couldn't get the divorce he so desired, he convicted her of adultery and other crimes, where soon after she was beheaded. Ooh, scandalous. It's said that on the ground of Blickling Hall her ghost remains, headless, aimlessly wandering the halls. Oh dear. Number 9, Himeji Castle. All the way in the beautiful land of Japan, where cherry blossoms bloom and blow. Atop the Hyogo Prefecture sits the beautiful Himeji Castle. Ooh. While it stands like a monument to feudal Japan architecture, she holds a deep dark tale. A servant of the castle named Okiku. She had been blamed for breaking some good dishes, like the same kind of good china my mom said not to touch, but I always wondered what the heck's the point of having them anyway if we're not going to use them, Mom. Well, she was so distraught that she manually checked out of life. Ooh. When the guards found her in the kitchen, they dumped her down the well, as you do. Just procedure back then, I guess. It is said that she still haunts the castle today and can be heard counting the dishes she was accused of breaking, followed by sobbing and shrieking. No thanks. I don't know if you guys know, I don't like horror stuff, I don't like ghosts. Nope, not going, sorry. Number 8, Frankenstein's Castle. Yes, that's right, the castle that inspired Mary Shelley's horror masterpiece, or so I'm told. I use Cliff Notes. It's a great story, but kind of a tough read in my opinion. Yeah, I use Cliff Notes, it's pretty rough. The actual real-life castle is thought to be haunted by a man named Johann Conrad Dippel. Besides that name being very scary, the castle has many dark secrets. Dippel had this weird thing where he was a mad scientist, very similar to Dr. Frankenstein in the book. His ultimate science goal, like something out of Call of Duty Zombies, was to raise the dead and reanimate the life. Yes, come back to life, my pretties. Oh yes. I don't know, that's I imagine he sounds like, I have no idea. To do this, he would seek out the freshly deceased and bring their body parts back to conduct not so family friendly experiments. After achieving his goal, he thought he would discover the secret to immortality. Now, after he drank one of his own experimental potions and elixirs, whatever you want to call that, he shortly passed away. Today it's said that his spirit can still be seen on the roof, watching over the other spirits of the graves that he disturbed. Yes, my little pretties, yes!
Number 7. A jester versus Netflix. As soon as I said jester, you pictured a tight-wearing, colorful bard with a stupid hat. Probably not far off, but the nobles had to entertain themselves somehow, as previously mentioned. The castle would play host to loads of minstrels, jugglers, and acrobats. Edward II, for instance, in 1306 had hundreds at his knighting celebration. But the original meaning of the jester was just simply a good storyteller. They would wander in on dark evenings and entertain the company with fancy tales, comedic and dramatic. But soon jesters became employed full-time to kings and lords. Henry II had one called Roland the Musical Farter. Great name. I wonder what he did. Every Christmas he would perform and earn a grant of the land, so they were paid pretty well. He had to be wise and quick-witted in order to maintain the love of their masters. However, if they went too far, off with their head. Triboulet, the king of France's fool, once went too far and was sentenced to execution, but he got out of it when they allowed him to choose how he would die. He simply said, old age, and he was pardoned. Again, quick-witted. Number 6. Gazing out of windows. Imagining a world where women are restricted from education, business, autonomy is thankfully getting harder and harder to do. But even without feminism, women still operated within the constraints of a patriarchal society in very important ways. It was their job to run the entire castle when the lord was away, for instance. They weren't just staring out windows, waiting to lower their hair for a handsome suitor. Medieval noblewomen, for instance, had the responsibility of running the household and enforcing it. Lords were often away on crusades, war, court, or even just dead. So it was up to the ladies to run the estate, finances, and even to defend the castle against attack. Also, if the husband was dead, many women would choose not to remarry because you had more advantages being a widow than being married. You would essentially be treated as a man, especially in terms of property and things like that. Religion was also incredibly important, and one of the restrictions for women at the time was that they were forbidden from touching the altar. So in order to metaphorically dance around this, they donated their clothes to the church, which would eventually be worn by the clergymen, hence they would eventually touch the altar. A very clever way of getting around this rule, but more research needs to be done about women in the medieval ages, but this is kind of what it looked like. Number 5. Shotgun weddings. Behind the closed doors of the castle walls, love lives were pretty much what you would expect them to be. Really stinky, and also not about love. Marriage was politically motivated, and there wasn't room for much love there. Women had essentially no say, and both boys and girls could be married as soon as 12 to 14. However, compared to today, their ceremonies would be better compared to a shotgun wedding in Vegas than the ones we know. It would be completed in a matter of moments just by simply uttering consent. You could marry technically in the street, or at dinner, or at a pub, or in bed after the deed is done. So because things got so confusing by the 12th century, marriage got more complicated. It was declared a holy sacrament that must be observed by God. Observed being the key word. Not only did people actually have to see people saying I do, they had to see them do the deed. The bride was carried to the bed by the family, and they would wait around until the act was complete, so you know what I mean. If you were lucky enough to live in a castle, you might have had bed curtains to shield the viewing, but they still heard everything that was going on. Number 4. The Mystery of Ludlow Castle. Beyond weird weddings, war, and strange food performances, castles contain secrets behind their walls we may never know, such as the mystery of the White Lady of Ludlow Castle. In the 12th century, the castle was home to Marion de la Bruyere, and she had a secret. She was in love with a secret suitor with whom she would sneak into the castle each night. She would lower a rope in true Rapunzel fashion to bring her love to her. But little did she know that her mysterious love was setting a trap for her. One night he left the rope below so that more men could follow up behind him and take the castle. Bereft and betrayed, Marion stabbed her lover with his own sword. She then flung herself from the castle's walls and perished on the rocks below. To this day, people have stories of seeing a woman's white figure tumbling from the castle window, trapped in the desperate circumstances of her death.
Number 3. Winchester Mansion. I'm not personally sure how haunting works or or ghosts, or like the great beyond works. I might be Canadian, but I'm certainly no Dan Aykroyd or Ghostbuster. I just don't know. The Winchester Manor is quite the peculiar case. It belonged to the Winchester family of Wild West fame, the very same who supplied the big irons for every coach in America. When Mr. Winchester had passed, the family fortune and estate was left to his wife, Sarah Winchester. Now, what may have started as a large home and mansion, over time became a castle. Seriously, look at this thing, it's crazy. Sarah had add-on after add-on added to the mansion. After a while, these add-ons got stranger and stranger. Staircases that led nowhere, trap doors, doors that led to large falls, and some doors that just led to nowhere. It's very weird. Why all these strange things? Well, that's because she claimed that the lives her husband's work had taken were haunting the castle, and she had to build them to deter the ghosts that haunted her. Boy, that's insanity right there. That's just craziness. Number 2, Huska Castle. While we don't have an official name for our sixth sense, some people just have that extra spidey sense. I know I don't. Like when a Nigerian prince sends you an email asking for your help. Sounds pretty sus. But more interesting than that is animals. I swear I've seen my household cat act different in a thunderstorm. They just know. Or cows that lay down right before it rains. It's weird. How do they know that? They don't have TV or a meteorologist to tell them it's gonna rain, so how do they know? Well, it just makes sense because of the walls of Huska Castle in Czech Republic, animals won't go near it. Legend has it that it's the gate to hell, and a dragon was even spotted there one time. Well, if that's not your favorite kind of ghost story, there's more. During World War II, Germans took over the castle and used it as a base to conduct only the kind of experiments German scientists could do without adult supervision. To this day, it's recommended to stay away as you don't know what dark spirits may be lurking. Number 1, Leap Castle, Ireland. This bad boy dates back all the way to the 1200s and was under constant siege, as castles were known to be for the time period. It's kind of the reason why they were built. As this castle hosts a few creatures of the evening. One supposedly is a priest that perished in one of the many sieges and seeks his bloodthirsty revenge on those who come near the chapel. Won't catch me there. Another is a foul beast called It. Possibly related to the Stephen King one, I'm not sure. No one is completely sure of its origin, but it's said you will smell its rotting flesh before you even see it. And lastly, most disturbingly, is a mother who waits in the ruins of the castle wielding a blade, ready to take revenge on those who stole her kin away. Because like I said, ladies in dresses and floating, that's the scariest. I don't like that. No thank you.